Imagine an enemy so terrifying, so utterly relentless, that the greatest empire the world had ever known simply gave up trying to conquer them. We all know the stories of the Roman Empire. Its legions were a seemingly unstoppable force, marching across continents, crushing armies, and absorbing entire civilizations into their world. They built walls to mark the edges of their known universe. But in the wild, misty north of Britain, they didn't just make a wall to keep people out. They built a wall because they were terrified of what was on the other side. Living in those shadowy highlands and windswept coasts was a people who haunted the Roman psyche. They called them the Picti, the painted people. And for centuries, that's almost all we knew. They were the ghosts of the north, a mysterious confederation of tribes who covered their bodies in breathtaking and intricate tattoos of animals and swirling patterns. Roman chroniclers, trying to make sense of these warriors, described them as savages who fought with little more than iron chains around their waists, preferring to display their stunning body art than to wear armour. They were seen as barbarians from the edge of the world, but here's the thing that makes your hair stand on end. These so-called savages did the impossible. At the absolute height of Roman power, they fought the legions to a bloody standstill and held their land. They didn't just survive, they thrived, forging a powerful kingdom that would endure for over 600 years, while the rest of Europe descended into chaos after Rome's fall. And then, almost as mysteriously as they appeared in history, their story seems to just end. Their language vanished. Their culture was absorbed. Their identity was seemingly erased from the pages of time. For well over 1,000 years, the Picts have remained one of history's greatest and most frustrating enigmas. Who were they? Were they invaders from distant lands, as some medieval scholars believed? Were they a lost tribe of Celts or something else entirely? They left behind no books, no written accounts of their history, their beliefs, or their kings. All they left were clues, scattered across the Scottish landscape like a trail of breadcrumbs. They left behind hundreds of towering stones, carved with symbols so strange, so alien, that they looked like a message from another world. For centuries, we could do little more than guess. We were left with the biased accounts of their mortal enemies, the Romans, and the fantastical tales of later chroniclers. But what if I told you that everything we thought we knew about them was wrong? What if I told you that in just the last couple of years, a shocking discovery has finally torn back the veil of mystery? Cutting-edge science has unlocked a secret, hidden not in stone, but in the very bones of the Picts themselves. A secret that has been waiting for 2 millennia to be told. We are finally about to learn the truth, and it's a truth that is far more astonishing than any myth or legend. It's a story of hidden cities, brilliant military genius, and a genetic revelation that changes not only our understanding of ancient Scotland, but could change your understanding of who you are. The story of the Picts isn't about a people who vanished. It's the story of a ghost kingdom that never truly left, whose legacy is written not just in stone, but in the DNA of millions of people alive today. We are about to peel back the layers of paint and propaganda to reveal the faces of one of the most formidable and misunderstood civilizations in European history. The shocking truth is finally here. So let's start with the first lie the Romans told themselves, that the Picts were primitive, that their victories were flukes. The truth is, the Picts' success wasn't just about ferocity, it was about a level of psychological and tactical genius that the Romans simply couldn't comprehend. Let me paint you a picture of just how brilliant these warriors were. Imagine you are a Roman legionary, part of the most disciplined and feared fighting force on the planet. You've marched into the misty, alien landscape of Caledonia, what we now call Scotland. You expect to face another barbarian horde, a disorganised mob that will break and flee at the first sign of your structured, impenetrable formations. And at first, that's exactly what seems to happen. You see them, the painted warriors, howling and screaming from the edges of the forest. You advance, shields locked, and after a brief, chaotic clash, they appear to retreat, melting back into the trees. Victory is declared. It was easy, just as you expected. Your commanders are confident, and your cohort begins the methodical process of setting up a fortified camp for the night, the familiar and orderly routine of the empire asserting itself over the wilderness. But then as dusk settles, something feels wrong. The woods are too quiet. The birds have stopped singing. And in that disquieting silence, the real battle begins. Without warning, they return. Pouring out of the woods like ghosts, they crash into your camp from all sides at once. The ordered lines of the legion dissolve into chaos. They aren't fighting you head on, they are everywhere, striking from the shadows, creating panic and confusion and then vanishing before a proper defense can be mounted. They turn your greatest strength, your discipline, into a fatal weakness. This wasn't a one-time trick, it was their doctrine. Time and time again, the Picts employed these sophisticated hit-and-run and psychological warfare tactics. They understood something fundamental about their enemy. Rome's strength lay in heavy infantry and disciplined formations fighting on open ground. So the Picts simply refused to fight on Roman terms. They used their intimate knowledge of the Scottish landscape, the dense forests, the treacherous bogs, the rolling hills, as a weapon in itself. They would use small bands of warriors to stage feigned retreats, deliberately luring the overconfident Roman cavalry away from the protection of their main infantry block. And any cavalry commander foolish enough to give chase would find themselves led into a perfectly prepared ambush miles from help, where they would be surrounded and annihilated. This wasn't savagery. This was a masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. This military brilliance reached its absolute zenith on a single, fateful day that would change the course of British history forever. The date was May 20th, 685 AD. By this time, the Roman Empire had long since abandoned Britain, but a new power had risen in its place: the massive Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Northumbria. It was a Christian kingdom that stretched all the way from Sheffield in the south to the outskirts of modern Edinburgh. They were the new superpower, and they had successfully subjugated the Picts, treating them as vassals. But the Pictish king, a man named Bride mac Beally, was not a man who took kindly to being ruled. He had other plans. When King Ecgfrith of Northumbria heard whispers of a Pictish rebellion, he was incensed. He saw it as an insignificant uprising by a lesser people and decided to march north with his massive army to crush them once and for all, to teach them a final, bloody lesson. But King Bride was a student of his ancestors' tactics. He knew he couldn't face the full might of the Northumbrian army on an open field, so he orchestrated one of the most brilliant military traps in medieval history. As Ecgfrith's army marched deeper into Pictish territory, Bride used their classic, time-honoured strategy. He had his warriors engage in small skirmishes and then stage convincing, panicked retreats. He drew the arrogant and overconfident Northumbrian king and his elite cavalry deeper and deeper into his kingdom, pulling them further and further away from their slower-moving infantry support. He lured them towards a very specific, carefully chosen battlefield near a lake called Lyn Garan, the Pool of Herons. It was a place of hills and treacherous marshland, a place where the Northumbrians' numbers and heavy armour would be a liability, not an advantage. When the trap was finally sprung, the results were nothing short of catastrophic. The Pictish army, which had been hiding in the surrounding hills, descended on the trapped Northumbrians. King Ecgfrith was slain on the field, and his army was utterly destroyed. The Battle of Nectansmere, as it came to be known, wasn't just a victory, it was an annihilation that forever ended Northumbrian dominance in the north. It secured Pictish independence and created the political vacuum that would in time allow for the very formation of the nation of Scotland. They were not just survivors, they were kingmakers, architects of a nation. But even this incredible military legacy is overshadowed by the other great mystery they left behind. What was the meaning of those strange, silent stones? These silent sentinels of stone are, without a doubt, the most captivating and enigmatic legacy the Picts left behind. For centuries they have stood in the wind and the rain, in quiet churchyards and on lonely moors, guarding a secret that we lost the ability to read. Across the landscape of eastern and northern Scotland, around 350 of these incredible Pictish stones have survived the ravages of time. But archaeologists estimate this is just a whisper of what once existed. They believe this represents perhaps only 30% of the original monuments. Countless others were likely destroyed, smashed by religious reformers who saw them as pagan relics, or callously reused as building materials in later farms and castles, their profound messages lost forever, hidden in the walls of a forgotten barn. So what are they? Random doodles by a primitive people? Crude grave markers? For a very long time, that's what many believed. But the truth is infinitely more complex and intelligent. When you start to look closely, you realise something extraordinary. These aren't random doodles at all. The symbols are specific, precise, and they repeat with an almost mathematical consistency across hundreds of stones, spanning hundreds of miles and hundreds of years. This was a system. This was a code. You see the same hauntingly beautiful symbols appearing again and again. There's the elegant crescent shape, often intersected by a V-rod. There's the double disc, connected by a Z-rod that sizzles with geometric energy. There are instantly recognisable objects like a mirror and a comb, symbols of wealth and status, almost always appearing as a pair. And then there are the animals, carved with a flowing, dynamic artistry that is utterly unique in ancient European art. You see stags, eagles, salmon and bulls. But then there's something else. The most common and most baffling symbol of all, a creature we now call the Pictish beast. It's a strange swimming creature that looks something like a dolphin or a seahorse, with a long elegant snout, ornate limbs and a swirling crest. We have no idea what it represents. It doesn't match any known animal from mythology or the natural world. It is uniquely, purely Pictish. The fact that these symbols repeat so precisely, and often in specific pairings, tells us something revolutionary. Scholars now believe, with a growing sense of certainty, that what we are looking at is a codified, symbolic writing system. It's not an alphabet in the way we understand it, but a system designed to communicate specific, complex ideas. The leading theory is that these symbols represent names, not the names of individuals spelled out, but the names of lineages, clans, and powerful families. Essentially, what we are looking at are ancient family crests, a declaration of identity etched into the very skin of the landscape over 1,500 years ago. Each stone is a statement, a proclamation of who held that land, who was buried there, or who formed an alliance. It's a family tree written in stone, and the stones themselves tell a powerful story of cultural evolution, falling into 3 distinct categories that act as a timeline for Pictish society. The first are the Class 1 stones. These are the oldest, and in many ways the most mysterious. They date from the 5th to the 7th centuries, the era of the warrior kings who fought Rome to a standstill. The symbols on these stones are simply incised, carved directly into the surface of raw, unshaped natural boulders. There's a raw power to them, a sense of a people deeply connected to their natural environment, choosing to write their identity onto the very bones of the land itself. These are purely Pictish, containing no outside influences, a window into their original, pre-Christian worldview. Then, as Christianity began to spread through their territory, the stones changed. We begin to see the emergence of Class 2. Stones. These are a breathtaking fusion of the old world and the new. They are typically large, rectangular slabs of stone, and on one side you will find an elaborate, beautifully carved Christian cross, decorated with intricate Celtic knotwork. But on the other side, or even surrounding the cross itself, the ancient Pictish symbols are still there: the crescent, the beast, the double disc. This wasn't a case of a new religion simply erasing the old one. It was an integration. The Picts were adopting Christianity, but refusing to abandon their ancestral identity. They were saying, in effect, we are Christian, but we are still Pictish. It's a powerful statement of cultural resilience and adaptation. Finally, we have the Class 3 stones. These are the latest monuments, and on them, the ancient symbols have vanished completely. They are purely Christian monuments: cross slabs, grave markers, and church stones. They mark the final stage of a profound cultural transformation, the moment when the uniquely Pictish identity begins to merge into a broader Scottish and Christian identity. The story of the stones is the story of the Pictish people in miniature. But what if the stones weren't just grave markers in an empty landscape? What if they were signposts, pointing to something far grander? Something that archaeologists had insisted for a century couldn't possibly exist in ancient Scotland. The stones hinted at a secret, hidden in plain sight. A secret that would require us to look at the very hills themselves in a completely new way, and would shatter our entire conception of what a barbarian society was capable of building. For more than a century, the established archaeological consensus painted a very specific picture of ancient Scotland. It was a land of scattered, small-scale farming communities, a place of modest homesteads and small defensive structures known as brocks and duns. The idea of large-scale, permanent settlements, anything that could be called a town or even a city, was considered anachronistic. That kind of urban living, the experts told us, didn't really arrive in Scotland until the 12th century, with the arrival of Norman-influenced feudalism and the establishment of royal burghs. The Picts, in this narrative, were a rural, dispersed people, incapable of the organisation and resources required for true urbanism. But in the last few years, this long-held assumption has been proven spectacularly, breathtakingly wrong. The Picts didn't just build forts, they built what can only be described as ancient cities. And the evidence was hiding in plain sight, on the very tops of Scotland's iconic hills. Take, for example, the monumental site of Tapo Noth in Aberdeenshire. It's a massive hill that dominates the surrounding landscape. For years it was known to be the site of a large fort, but its true scale and significance were completely unknown. That all changed with the application of modern technology. Using sophisticated drone surveys and LiDAR, a form of laser scanning that can effectively see through vegetation and topsoil to map the ground beneath, archaeologists were able to peel back the layers of time. And what they found was astonishing. The data revealed the unmistakable footprint of over 800 huts clustered on the hilltop, enclosed by a massive stone rampart. Based on the density of these dwellings, researchers have estimated that in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, at the height of the Pictish kingdom, as many as 4,000 people may have lived on this single, windswept hill. To put that into perspective, that is a population density that would have rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, the largest known post-Roman urban centres anywhere else in Europe at that time. This wasn't just a fort, this was a city, a sprawling, thriving hub of Pictish life, and the defences of these places are a mystery in themselves. The stone walls enclosing sites like Tapo Noth show extensive evidence of a bizarre and terrifying phenomenon known as vitrification. The stones of the rampart have been heated to such an extreme temperature, over 1,000 degrees Celsius, that they have literally melted, flowing like glass and fusing together into a solid, impenetrable mass. For years, historians debated how this could have happened. Was it the result of an accidental fire, or was it a deliberate, if mysterious, construction technique? The prevailing theory now is that it was intentional. The Picts built their walls using a timber-laced construction method, a latticework of massive wooden beams crisscrossing through the stonework. When this timber was set ablaze, it would have burned with an incredible furnace-like intensity, creating the heat required to vitrify the stone. The result was a wall that was not just strong, but almost indestructible. The exact techniques they used, how they controlled such an inferno, remains one of archaeology's great unsolved mysteries, a testament to their sophisticated engineering skills. And Tapo Noth isn't an isolated case. Travel north to the coast of Moray, to a place called Burghead. Here, excavations have uncovered another massive Pictish power centre. But this wasn't just a hilltop city, it was a vast naval base. It was a promontory fort, jutting out into the sea, protected by a series of sophisticated triple ramparts. This wasn't just a defensive outpost, it was a complex military and administrative centre that controlled the vital shipping lanes of the Moray Firth. It was from here that the Picts would have launched their fleets of ships, large enough that later Irish annals record a single storm wrecking 150 of them. Think about that. Not 15, but 150 ships. This implies a level of maritime power and logistical capability far beyond what anyone ever imagined for them. And these settlements weren't filled with primitive huts. Excavations at elite sites, like a remarkable complex at Rhynie, also in Aberdeenshire, have produced evidence that has forced a complete rewrite of Pictish society. At Rhynie, archaeologists found sherds of pottery that were not local. They were from amphorae used to transport Mediterranean wine. They found shards of beautifully crafted, delicate glass beakers imported from what is now France. They found exquisite silver jewellery, finely made pins, and evidence of a society with deep and far-reaching international trade networks. The Pictish elite, 1,500 years ago, living in the heart of the Scottish Highlands, were drinking wine from the continent out of fine French glass. They had advanced agricultural technology, capable of producing the surpluses needed to support thousands of people living in cities. They had sophisticated social hierarchies, with powerful kings and a warrior aristocracy at the top. They were literate, in their own symbolic way, and they were connected to trade networks that spanned all of Europe. They were, in every sense of the word, a complex civilization. And this brings us to the biggest question of all. If they were this advanced, this powerful, this indigenous, where did the idea that they were strange, exotic foreigners even come from? And what does their very DNA have to say about it? The answer, unlocked by science, is the final piece of the puzzle, and it changes everything. For centuries, the question of Pictish origins has been a playground for speculation, myth-making, and historical guesswork. Without any written records from the Picts themselves, historians were forced to rely on the accounts of others, accounts that were often coloured by politics, propaganda, or sheer fantasy. One of the earliest and most influential theories came from the Venerable Bede, an English monk writing in the 8th century. In his famous work, The Ecclesiastical History of the English People, Bede claimed that the Picts had migrated to Britain from Scythia, a vast and vaguely defined region near the Black Sea. He spun a tale of them arriving by sea, being denied land in Ireland, and then being guided to the north of Britain, where they settled and took wives from the native Scots. This story, coming from such a respected source, became incredibly powerful and was accepted as fact for hundreds of years. Later, during the Romantic era, other even more fanciful theories emerged. The Picts were cast as a mysterious, non-Celtic race, perhaps even a remnant of a prehistoric people who had survived in the isolated Highlands, a truly alien presence in the British Isles. These tales of them being exotic immigrants or mysterious foreigners were compelling. They added to the aura of enigma that surrounded them. It made their art seem more alien, their disappearance more profound. The idea that they were other was a powerful narrative, but it was a narrative built on sand. For decades, archaeologists and linguists have chipped away at these myths, pointing out that Pictish place names and the few scraps of their language we can infer from king lists suggest a language that was, in fact, related to the Brittonic Celtic languages spoken elsewhere in Britain, like ancient Welsh. Their art, while unique, showed clear influences from and connections to Irish and other Celtic art forms. The evidence increasingly suggested that they weren't foreigners at all, but suggestion isn't proof. The debate raged on. The mystery of their origins remained one of the most hotly contested subjects in early British history. And then, in 2023, the debate was ended. Not by a new interpretation of an ancient text or the discovery of a new stone, but by the cold, hard, undeniable truth of science. A groundbreaking study, led by researchers at the University of Aberdeen and published in the prestigious scientific journal PLOE, Genetics, did something that had previously been impossible. They successfully extracted and analysed ancient DNA from the remains of individuals buried in Pictish cemeteries, including sites like Lundin Links in Fife and Ballintor in Easter Ross. This wasn't just a small sample, it was a comprehensive look into the very genetic code of the Pictish people. For the first time, we weren't just looking at their art or reading what their enemies wrote about them. We were looking at the Picts themselves, and the results were nothing short of a revolution. They were the definitive answer to the 1,000-year-old question of who the Picts really were, and the truth wasn't what anyone expected. The genetic evidence delivered a stunning and unequivocal verdict. The Picts were not exotic immigrants. They were not mysterious invaders from Scythia or anywhere else. They were the indigenous people of Scotland. Their DNA showed deep local roots, proving that they were descended from the local Iron Age communities that had inhabited the region for centuries, even millennia, before the Romans ever set foot in Britain. The people the Romans encountered were not newcomers. They were the established native population who had simply developed into a powerful and sophisticated kingdom in response to the Roman threat. They were the original Scots, in the geographical sense. The entire foundation of the mysterious foreigner myth crumbled overnight. But the DNA analysis revealed something even more remarkable, something that resonates powerfully to this day. When the researchers compared the ancient Pictish genomes to the DNA of modern populations, they found the highest degree of genetic similarity, the clearest ancestral link, in people from Western Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and Northumbria. The legacy of the Picts wasn't just in stone, it was in the blood. If you have deep ancestral roots in these regions, you aren't just looking at a historical curiosity when you look at those carved stones. You might literally be looking at the legacy of your own distant ancestors. The painted people never truly vanished. Their genetic signature is still walking among us. The study also provided a fresh scientific perspective on another long-standing historical debate. Bede and other medieval sources had claimed that Pictish society was matrilineal, that kingship and inheritance passed not from father to son, but through the female line. This was often used as another example of their supposed otherness. The genetic evidence from the Pictish cemetery at Lundin Links, however, suggested the reality was far more complex. While some Pictish king lists do show patterns that could hint at maternal inheritance, the DNA from this particular cemetery didn't show the expected patterns of individuals being related through their mothers. This doesn't disprove matrilineality entirely, but it suggests a more nuanced and varied social structure than the simple, rigid system described by medieval chroniclers. It reveals a society that we are only just beginning to truly understand, stripped of myth and legend. So we have a scientifically proven indigenous people who built cities, commanded fleets, and defeated empires. This brings us to the final, haunting question. If the Picts were so powerful, so successful, and so deeply rooted in their land, what on earth happened to them? Why did their kingdom disappear? Why did their language fall silent? This is perhaps the most persistent myth of all. The idea that the Picts were mysteriously wiped out, conquered and erased from history by their rivals, the Gaels of the kingdom of Dalriata. The traditional story, popular for centuries, tells of a violent takeover. It centres on one man, Kenneth MacAlpin, a figure who had claims to both the Pictish and the Gaelic thrones. The legend goes that around the year 843 AD, in an event known as MacAlpin's treason, Kenneth invited the Pictish king and his nobles to a great feast at Scone. There, in a shocking act of betrayal, he had them all murdered and seized control of the Pictish kingdom, forcibly merging it with his own. It's a dramatic story of conquest and cultural annihilation, but once again, the evidence tells a very different and far more interesting story. There is, in fact, absolutely no contemporary evidence for this supposed massacre. It appears to be a much later invention, a piece of political propaganda designed to legitimize a new dynasty. The real story of the end of the Pictish kingdom is not one of conquest, but of convergence. It wasn't a violent death, but a gradual transformation. The Picts and the Gaels of Dalriata, whose kingdom was based in what is now Argyll and the Inner Hebrides, weren't just hostile neighbours. They had been interacting for centuries. They fought, yes, but they also traded, they made alliances, and crucially, they intermarried. Pictish kings had Gaelic names. Gaelic nobles had Pictish mothers. Their societies were becoming increasingly intertwined. The lines between them were becoming blurred. When Kenneth MacAlpin came to power, it seems to have been less of a hostile takeover and more of a political union, the culmination of generations of cultural and genetic mixing. He was a man who embodied both kingdoms, and he became king of a new, unified realm. Over the next century, this unified kingdom gradually began to be known not as Pictland, but as Alba, the Gaelic name for the land. Slowly but surely, the Pictish language, which was likely already under pressure, began to give way to Gaelic, the language of the new political and church elite. Many of the old Pictish customs and laws were absorbed into the broader Scottish identity that was beginning to emerge. This wasn't a cultural genocide, it was a merger. The Picts didn't disappear. They evolved. They became the Scots. Their kingdom formed the very heartland of what would become the medieval kingdom of Scotland. Their territory, their people, and their genetic legacy provided the foundation for the modern nation. The answer to the question, where did the Picts go, is beautifully simple. They went nowhere. They are still here, woven into the very fabric of Scottish identity. And just as our scientific understanding has leaped forward, so too has our archaeological discovery. The story of the Picts is not a closed book. New chapters are being written every single year. In just 2024 alone, a flurry of stunning discoveries has added yet more detail to their rich and complex world. At Aberlemno, a village already famous for its magnificent Pictish stones, archaeologists found a previously unknown carved stone, further cementing the area's importance as a major Pictish power centre. In a field in Dice, near Aberdeen, another rare symbol stone was unearthed. adding another precious word to their silent, symbolic language. And the ongoing work in the Rhine Valley, the site of that elite settlement with the French wine and glass, is revealing what might be an early royal Pictish landscape. A ceremonial and political centre of immense importance. Each new find, each new excavation, adds another piece to the puzzle. We are constantly rediscovering them, realising just how much we have underestimated them for so long. The shocking truth, revealed by all this converging evidence from genetics, archaeology, and a critical rereading of history, is this. The Picts were not an anomaly. They were not savages. They were not mysterious foreigners who vanished without a trace. They were a sophisticated, literate, and resilient indigenous people who built one of the most successful kingdoms of the early medieval period. They created magnificent world-class art. They engineered cities and fortresses that defied their environment. They successfully resisted the greatest military machine of the ancient world and went on to forge a nation. And their legacy is not confined to museums or the pages of history books. It lives on in the incredible carved stones that still stand guard over the Highland valleys. And it lives on in the DNA of millions of people who can now look back and claim a connection to these remarkable painted people. The greatest mystery of the Picts was never where they came from. It was why we ever believed they left. So let's take a step back and absorb what this all truly means. For over 1,000 years, the Picts have been a byword for mystery. They were the ultimate historical enigma, the lost people of Britain. Their story was a blank canvas onto which we projected our own fantasies and fears. The savage barbarian, the exotic wanderer, the ghost in the machine of history. This image was so powerful because it was convenient. It was a simple answer to a complex question. But it was an illusion. The latest science and archaeology have not just added a few new facts to their story, they have completely shattered the illusion. They have forced us to confront a truth that is far more profound and frankly far more respectful to the people themselves. The Picts were not lost. They were just silenced. They were silenced by their lack of a written language that we could understand. They were silenced by the biased accounts of their enemies. And they were silenced by the passage of time, which turned their vibrant society into a cold, archaeological puzzle. But now we can hear them again. We hear them in the irrefutable language of DNA, which tells us they were not outsiders, but the deep-rooted inheritors of the land they fought so hard to protect. It tells a story of continuity, of a people who belong, whose genetic echoes still resonate today. We see them in the breathtaking ambition of their settlements. When you stand on the summit of Tap O Noth and imagine 4,000 people living there, trading, working, celebrating, defending, the word primitive becomes utterly absurd. You are standing in the ruins of a Pictish metropolis, a centre of power and population that was a major player on the European stage. We see their intellect in the coded language of their symbol stones. These are not crude markings. They are the sophisticated expressions of identity, lineage, and power, a system of communication so visually potent that it has fascinated and baffled us for centuries. And we feel their resilience in the story of Nectansmere, where they outthought and outfought a superpower, securing their own destiny in a single brilliant afternoon of tactical genius. When you put all of this together, the image that emerges is not of a mysterious tribe, but of a remarkable civilization that succeeded against all odds. In an age of collapse and chaos, when the certainties of the Roman world had dissolved, the Picts built something new and enduring. They created a stable, powerful kingdom that controlled a vast territory for centuries. They fostered artists who created some of the most stunning and unique art in post-Roman Europe. They were mariners and traders, connected to the wider world, and far from being conquered and erased, their political and demographic legacy formed the very bedrock of one of Europe's oldest nations. Scotland did not rise from the ashes of the Pictish kingdom, it rose from its foundations. This revelation is about more than just correcting the historical record. It's about restoring dignity to a people who have been misrepresented for far too long. So when you visit Scotland today and you see one of those incredible carved stones standing sentinel in a Highland valley or a quiet churchyard, you are not just looking at an ancient monument, you are witnessing a direct link to this incredible story. You are seeing a testament to a people's unshakable sense of identity. You are looking at the legacy of a civilization that resisted oppression, that created beauty in a harsh world, and that left something profound and meaningful for future generations to discover. Whether you have Pictish ancestry coursing through your veins or not, these stones represent something universal. The fundamental human drive to make a mark, to say, we were here, to create, to resist, and to endure. The painted people never really disappeared. They're still there, written in stone and etched into the double helix of DNA, reminding us that some of history's greatest mysteries are worth waiting over 1,000 years to finally solve. Their silence has been broken, and their true story is only just beginning to be told.